The First Amendment, written in 1791, reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech, which is the one we normally associate with this amendment, or of the press or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The very First Amendment.
I promised 4 years ago at the Republican convention, I'm going to restore law and order.
And I have, except in Democrat-run cities. Look, we have laws. We have to go by the laws. We can't move in the National Guard. I can call insurrection, but there's no reason to ever do that, even in a Portland case. We can't call in the National Guard unless we're requested by a governor.
Hundreds of armed U.S. Marines are deployed to protect federal buildings in Los Angeles. These troops wearing body armor and armed with assault rifles now surrounding the federal building in Westwood, along with a number of military vehicles. It's a very rare and controversial deployment of military forces on American soil, with thousands taking to SoCal streets rather for tomorrow's No Kings protest. There are fears of violent confrontation could be sparked.
In Los Angeles, after those sweeping ICE immigration raids sparked protests, a massive military response from President Trump. Tonight, more than 4,000 members of the California National Guard activated by the president, not the governor, and now 700 active duty Marines sent in too. Tonight, more U.S. troops are now activated for Los Angeles than in Iraq and Syria, costing American taxpayers $134 million. Protesters gathering near a federal building in downtown Los Angeles. The LAPD containing protesters and moving them off the streets. After dark, protesters setting off fireworks, a massive police response. Nearly 100 people were arrested.
In a push to get the upper hand on the protest disrupting downtown Los Angeles, an aggressive show of force by the LAPD overnight, arresting over 100 people. Dozens of less lethal rounds used by law enforcement to disrupt groups, setting fireworks off at officers. Officers pouring in from every direction, overwhelming protesters. President Trump defending his actions, saying those 700 Marines and more than 4,000 National Guard troops sent to L.A. against the wishes of officials on the ground here are there to stay, addressing troops at Fort Bragg.
They're stopping an invasion just like you'd stop an invasion.
Trump appearing to accuse the California governor and L.A. mayor of paying demonstrators with no proof.
And they paid troublemakers, agitators, and insurrectionists. They're engaged in this willful attempt to nullify federal law and aid the occupation of the city by criminal invaders. That's what it is.
Trump even suggesting without evidence that without the help of the National Guard, the city would be in flames. But we witnessed many of the protesters self-policing, keeping others in check. The National Guard's role has been minimal. There are now more U.S. troops deployed to Los Angeles than Iraq and Syria. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on Capitol Hill with DoD leaders saying the mission will go on for the next 60 days, costing $134 million.
We have deployed National Guard and the Marines to protect them in the execution of their duties, because we ought to be able to enforce immigration law in this country. And ICE agents need to be able to do their job. They're being attacked for doing their job, which is deporting illegal criminals.
And a short time ago, LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell addressing accusations his officers did too little, too late to assist federal officers.
My understanding, based on what we've looked at, is it was within 38 minutes. Normal
total from the time that you started to the time you actually got.
From the time that we became aware of the need to the time we got there was 38 minutes.
President Trump deploying more than 4,000 National Guard troops and 700 Marines to Los Angeles. Their role in dispersing crowds has been minimal, but ICE posting these photos on their X account showing National Guardsmen providing protection for ICE agents on a raid in Los Angeles. Governor Gavin Newsom filed a motion Tuesday to stop troops from accompanying ICE on raids, which goes beyond protecting buildings, arguing it will escalate tensions.
What's happening right now is very different than anything we've seen before.
Trump on on social media calling Newsom incompetent, accusing him of not protecting ICE officers in a timely manner. The Attorney General says the Justice Department will vigorously prosecute violent protesters. Pam Bondi disputing that President Trump's pardons for rioters who assaulted police during the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol creates a double standard in comparison with the administration's response to these protests.
Well, this is very different. These are people out there hurting people in California right now. This is ongoing.
And the Marines deployed here to Los Angeles are currently undergoing civil unrest training.
Thousands of National Guard troops remain stationed throughout the city. Today, a battalion of 700 Marines is expected to arrive there in L.A. Meanwhile, a federal appeals court has ruled the Trump administration can maintain control of those troops in California. The late-night ruling reverses a lower court judge's order. A federal judge had told the administration to return control of the National Guard to Governor Gavin Newsom earlier in the day. But the Trump administration quickly filed an appeal, resulting in a temporary pause of the lower court's ruling. The appeals court will hold a hearing on the matter next week. Governor Newsom has opposed President Trump's decision to deploy the troops, arguing the presence of militarized law enforcement only intensifies protests and raises the possibility of conflict. Kind of a quick back and forth for people having trouble keeping up in the courts yesterday about who gets to control these National Guard troops. Can you kind of walk us through what happened and where it sits this morning?
So, Willie, yesterday, late at night, maybe about 8 o'clock last night, Judge Charles Breyer, he is a federal judge sitting in San Francisco, and he ruled last night that the single statute that Trump used to justify bringing in the National Guard had 3 predicates to it, and that Trump didn't meet any of them in calling in the National Guard. Therefore, the use and deployment of the Guard in Los Angeles, based on Trump's June 7th memo, is unlawful, and he temporarily restrained them from using the Guard, saying that the control of the California National Guard, and there are 4,000 of them that have been called up, has to be returned to Governor Gavin Newsom. Later last night, not even 2 hours later, the Ninth Circuit of the U.S. Court of Appeals put a temporary pause on that order, as you said. That means that, in effect, nothing is changed and won't be changed at least until next Tuesday, when that Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals meets to hear argument as to whether Judge Breyer's temporary restraining order should or should not be honored. One of the things that might have been going through that appeals court's head last night in granting the stay, and they didn't really write an opinion, they just said, we're going to grant this temporary pause, here is when briefs are due. One of the things they may have been thinking about is trying to prevent further chaos by pulling back the National Guard, returning them to Newsom, who clearly would have sent them home, saying the LAPD and the LA sheriff had this well in hand. That could have made for a chaotic situation if the Ninth Circuit then reversed it. And so one of the things they may have been trying to do last night is just preserve what is a status quo right now, particularly given that Judge Breyer also found last night that it's too speculative to say that the use of the Guard to date violates the Posse Comitatus Act. That's the federal statute that prohibits using military troops for civilian law enforcement.
So President Trump has not yet invoked the Insurrection Act, though he and his aides have certainly started to use that word a little bit, perhaps just dangling it out there in case they decide to go that route. So outside of that, just big picture and taking politics out of it and how many Americans feel about troops being in the streets of an American city, is the president, is the Trump administration at this point on solid legal ground by sending those National Guard troops in?
Can they do it right now? Yes. Should they do it based on the reasoning of this decision? I would argue no. It's a really thorough decision. And Willie, it's a clever one because it's set up to withstand appeal. One of the things that Judge Breyer does in his opinion is he credits all the facts that the Trump administration offered him. Essentially, he says, look, I don't dispute that every mango that was chucked at law enforcement officers, every firework, every piece of concrete that you say was thrown at ICE officers, that happened. And yet, notwithstanding that, you weren't in your authority because this doesn't constitute a rebellion and you haven't shown that you were thoroughly unable to execute the laws of the United States. Just having an impediment to your execution of immigration laws isn't what the statute demands. So could Donald Trump continue to send National Guard to other places in the country by mimicking the order that he sent down last weekend? Sure. The one other thing that I want to bring to your and our viewers' attention is that Judge Breyer notes that the federalization, and I'm reading from the opinion of 4,000 members of California's National Guard, he's talking about the overreach. He's saying that federal overreach risks instigating the very behavior that the federal government fears. To put a finer point on it, the federal government cannot be permitted to exceed its bounds and in doing so create the very emergency conditions that it then relies on to justify federal intervention. That's a warning, I think, to the Trump administration. Don't go too far right now. You might not have gone far enough to violate the Posse Comitatus Act, but if you overreach here, you will be responsible for ratcheting up the protest activity such that it reaches a fervor and a point that it hasn't reached before you got involved.
And by the way, that's the exact case that Governor Newsom has made, which is the LAPD's got this. We don't need troops in the street, perhaps escalating things.
The Trump administration is heading into the weekend facing protests nationwide from a galvanized opposition and a sharp rebuke written for the history books from a federal judge. That opinion amounts to a legal body blow to Trump's efforts to use the United States military against Americans. It's a ruling currently paused by an appeals court from federal judge Charles Breyer. That order says that Donald Trump can no longer mobilize and command California's National Guard troops over the wishes of California's Governor Gavin Newsom. The judge went even further, though, than what the state of California asked for, which was an order limiting what exactly the troops could do on the streets of Los Angeles. The judge said that Donald Trump's, quote, actions were illegal, both exceeding the scope of his statutory authority and violating the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. This is from the ruling. Quote, he must therefore return control of the California National Guard to the governor of the state of California forthwith. The judge went on to say that Donald Trump's order deploying the National Guard, quote, sets a dangerous precedent for future domestic military activity. The citizens of Los Angeles face a greater harm from the continued unlawful militarization of their city, which not only inflames tensions with protesters, threatening increased hostilities and loss of life, but deprives the state for 2 months of its own use of thousands of National Guard members to fight fires, combat fentanyl trade, and perform other critical functions.
What this means right now is this was obviously appealed by the administration to the Ninth Circuit, which is the intermediate appellate court over California. And the Ninth Circuit stayed the ruling until it can conduct a hearing on June 17th, so next Tuesday. So that means for this weekend, when these protests and the No Kings protests and the parade are supposed to happen, we will actually see the National Guard acting under the auspices of presidential authority and not the governor's consultation in Los Angeles. So that can continue to happen, and then the Ninth Circuit will step in. Will it be moot at that point? It really depends on what the president does with regard to protests in other cities and whether he will be nationalizing the National Guard in those other venues, too.
Does the ruling on the substance, which I understand has stayed, impact the legal terrain if Trump decides to deploy National Guard troops to other states with Democratic or Republican governors who don't ask for them?
Well, I think it definitely provides a blueprint for other courts that are considering this issue. I mean, I don't think this is a very difficult question. There are two federal statutes in play here. There is Section 12406, which is the statute that the president has used here. It typically is invoked to nationalize the National Guard in tandem with some aspects of the Insurrection Act. It's only been used without the consultation of a state's governor in, to my knowledge, two circumstances, both involving civil rights. So it was deployed by President Eisenhower in the 1950s to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. It was later used by President Johnson to protect civil rights marchers in Selma, Alabama, without the consultation, obviously, of those states' governors. But otherwise, it's really been used as a kind of collaborative, consultative method with the president consulting with the governor of the state in order to nationalize the state's guard in that way. And Judge Breyer laid all of that out very clearly, and I think if this spreads to other cities, blue cities throughout the country, this is going to be a very potent blueprint for other courts who are examining the same issue.
You said blistering. I mean, in some places it almost reads like a fact check. There is no invasion.
Well, I mean, I think that's a question about the statutory language. So when the president gets to invoke this section of the act and without the consultation of the governor, he has to have to meet certain statutory standards, certain statutory conditions. And one of those is that we are being invaded. We are in open rebellion. And Judge Breyer sort of just stepped through the language of the statute. I mean, this is reading, basically, and said that's not what's happening here. In fact, what is happening here is that we have individuals who are protesting, exercising their First Amendment rights, rights that literally this country was founded on, and it cannot be the case that mere protest amounts to an invasion or a rebellion.
A major legal back and forth over President Trump's use of California's National Guard. An appeals court just paused a previous ruling that required Trump to return control of the National Guard to California. That means that for now, Trump can keep those troops there. Former U.S. attorney and host of the Talking Feds podcast, Harry Litman. Harry, good to see you. What is your reaction tonight to the Ninth Circuit now pausing the ruling?
A totally dizzying day in the courts, Laura, and what has just happened is basically after all this maneuvering, we're back to where we started. So the district court judge, Judge Chuck Breyer, made a very quick schedule and then had a hearing, went into chambers and pounded out a 36-page opinion that says Trump is wrong for two reasons. There isn't a rebellion, and it's to judges to say, and you're trenching on the state police power. Very definitive, thorough, meticulous opinion. Then he paused it for a day and a half so that the administration could appeal. They immediately did. Administrative stay. All that means is we're going to put it on hold until we think about it and hear about it next Tuesday in a hearing. It doesn't say Breyer's wrong, but it does restore the status quo. So as of tonight and this minute, those National Guardsmen have been, again, re-federalized, are under the control of the federal government.
And, you know, that Judge Breyer opinion, as you mentioned, it wrote in that ruling that Trump did not satisfy the requirements that must be met to call in the National Guard. You mentioned that these protests are not a rebellion. When you look ahead, this is obviously a can kicked down the road, but at some point, someone will have to assess the strength of the administration's case. How is it?
Well, I think his point is the most important, and when it goes to the Ninth Circuit and the Supreme Court, what is really going to be pivotal is, does the president just get deference to say it's a rebellion so the courts keep their hands off? What Breyer said is, the statute says whenever there's a rebellion, the president, etc. That means it's for the judges to say, is there or isn't there rebellion? Just like, Laura, in the Alien Enemies Act, it's for the judges to say, is there an invasion? If that holds, I think Trump will lose. This doesn't rise to the level of historical rebellions for a number of reasons. If, however, the courts, or especially the U.S. Supreme Court, says, we don't get into this, we defer to whatever the president thinks, then Trump is going to win and have a real path to unreviewable power. So what he could do and seems poised to do, and Homan says let's do right now, is bring the Marines in under the Insurrection Act. That's what he would need to invoke. And then they would really get to act like the traditions in America say should almost never happen. They would be regular law enforcement officers arresting, searching, seizing, and the like. But the administration hasn't done that yet. As of now, the Marines, it's actually unclear if they've even arrived in LA, but that part of the federal law enforcement presence is just not in play yet. All we have so far is the National Guard having been federalized.
And we know that hearing is going to take place now on Tuesday. As you mentioned, the original ruling was going to be paused until tomorrow, Friday. That's now been delayed to review until Tuesday in full. So we have a little bit of ways to go to figure out, which means that National Guard unit and beyond will remain throughout the weekend as well. Harry Littman.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Hang on to your hats. But that's right. We are now where we were before. And then, now remember, they can't do regular police work either. They are there to protect federal property and employees. But as of now, they can and must do that.
Any message to adversaries as the Army kicks off 250-year birthday celebration?
I just think it's amazing. We're going to have a fantastic June 14th parade, Flag Day. It's going to be an amazing day. We have tanks, we have planes, we have all sorts of things. And I think it's going to be great. We're going to celebrate our country for a change. Recently, as you know, with World War II, the victory of World War II, I called up France and they were celebrating the victory. Well, we helped them a lot, as you know. I don't have to get into that. But I called up other countries. They were all celebrating the victory. We're the only country that didn't celebrate the victory. And we're the one that won the war. Okay, if it wasn't for us, that war, you would be speaking German right now, okay? We won the war, and you might be speaking Japanese too. I mean, you might be speaking a combination of both. We won the war, and we're the only country that didn't celebrate it. And we're going to be celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but, this is people that hate our country, but they will be met with very heavy force.
Hegseth grilled over the military deployments. He's under oath here on Capitol Hill. And while some of this may still be a cross between dodging a question or trying to match the president's rhetoric, we are seeing, again, the normalizing or softening of the kind of lines that Pentagon chiefs in every administration and party would always be able to emphatically say, no, of course we don't use troops domestically to arrest American citizens, but yet here was the version of the answer today.
Are you prepared to authorize DHS to use drones and also to authorize military forces to detain or arrest American citizens?
Senator, every authorization we've provided the National Guard and the Marines in Los Angeles is under the authority of the President of the United States, is lawful and constitutional. They are assisting in defending law enforcement officers and law enforcement facilities.
So the answer is
in the execution of their job.
The answer is yes.
In the city of Los Angeles.
Joined now by Senator Jack Reed, who is also a retired Army captain, served in the 82nd Airborne, and was questioning the Pentagon Chief Secretary Pete Hegseth today.
What we were trying to establish is the fact that there is a strong constitutional barrier between the military acting as a force to defend the nation and as an internal police force. And what they're trying to do is gradually lower that barrier so that it becomes, quote unquote, normal that military people show up to enforce civil laws, that they are out to protect police officers. But the police officers of Los Angeles didn't ask for the protection. And the ICE agents are well-trained and armed and capable of, I think, protecting themselves. So this is more of eroding an essential part of the Constitution, which is the military is designed to protect us from foreign adversaries, organized militaries and others, not as an internal police force.
Mr. Secretary, during your confirmation hearing, you failed to deny the conclusion that you would carry out an order to shoot protesters in the legs. So let me be direct. Given what we are seeing across the country right now, would you carry out or issue an order by the president for our military to fire upon protesters actively engaging in their civil right to exercise free speech, their First Amendment rights? Would you give that order from the president?
I assume you're insinuating what's going on in Los Angeles, and I wouldn't call
Not just
that a
Los
peaceful
Angeles. If we
protest.
take a look at protests throughout the country, it's a simple question. If directed by the president, would you order our military to fire upon protesters? Simple yes or no.
Ma'am, we have, as you know, and as this committee knows, we have standard rules of engagement that are in place that give guidance to our troops, and they abide by them.
I'm asking what you would do. Again, you said you serve at the pleasure of the president. Is that not true?
I do serve at the
So
pleasure.
if the president told you to shoot people in the legs, would you do so? Now, you failed to answer this question as well in your confirmation hearing when asked by members of the Senate.
Because I refuse to accept a false hypothetical that's attempting to put me in a corner and make it look like a
At
representation.
a time when we have more Marines and
standard
National
rules of
Guard in
engagement
Los
and they are
Angeles than
followed.
we do in Syria and Iran alone, I don't think this is a hypothetical. This is an actual situation that we are dealing with right now. So again, I will ask the question in the last 14 seconds I have, would you order our military to shoot at their fellow countrymen if ordered by the president?
I think it's interesting that for 4 years, insurrection was the left's
I think we
favorite
know your
word,
answer. Thank you, Mr.
and that
Chair. I
when
yield
it's
back.
invoked in L.A., they were gentlelady yields back.
President Trump defending his unprecedented show of force in Los Angeles, making it clear that the 4,000 National Guardsmen and 700 Marines aren't going anywhere.
It can only go right by having the military. It de-escalates. I mean, that was the only way. These people are agitators. They're troublemakers.
But ABC has witnessed many of the protesters self-policing, keeping others in check. Despite objections from the governor, who says he doesn't need the federal presence and doesn't want them there, the president adamant they're needed to stop what he calls an invasion, speaking to troops at Fort Bragg.
They're stopping an invasion just like you'd stop an invasion.
There are now more U.S. troops in Los Angeles than in Iraq and Syria. On Capitol Hill, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth defending the mission, saying it will go on for the next 60 days, estimating it will cost American taxpayers $134 million.
Why are you sending war fighters to cities to interact with civilians?
Every American citizen deserves to live in a community that's safe, and ICE agents need to be able to do their job.
Democrats say the president is making matters worse.
The president's decision to call the National Guard troops to Los Angeles was premature, and the decision to deploy active duty Marines as well is downright escalatory.
All this as this morning tanks are rolling towards Washington ahead of the president's military parade this weekend. Trump with this warning to anyone who might show up to protest.
If there's any protester wants to come out, they will be met with very big force.
Trump not differentiating between violent and peaceful protesters. There are protests planned around the country for the day of the parade. The president has longed for this parade, a show of military might like he's seen from other countries. Sources tell ABC News mounted rocket launchers will be on display, as well as precision-guided missiles. This in addition to those tanks and an assortment of fighting vehicles. The event will also feature 6,700 soldiers and a 50-aircraft flyover. The total cost to taxpayers up to $45 million.
And the parade, which is intended to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Army, just so happens to also fall on President Trump's 79th birthday.
So his own sheriff, who's a good man, by the way, said 2 days ago or 3 days ago that we could not have done this without the military. They were going to take over they couldn't have done it. Now today they got him to change his tune. He said, Oh, I think we could have handled it. You know, it's so sad. He was so honest. I was using his quote all over the place, and they got him to change. But he knows. Los Angeles would be right now burning to the ground, just like the houses burned to the ground. It's so sad what's going on in Los Angeles.
We're going to begin with that in Los Angeles. You know by now what's happening there. The mayor has put a curfew in place downtown to try and stop the violent protest against President Trump's immigration crackdown. The LAPD announced it was initiating mass arrests. In the meantime, thousands of people marched peacefully. Peacefully is the word here in other cities, including Dallas, Chicago, San Francisco, and right here in New York. Jonathan Bigliotti's in downtown LA for us covering the story. He spoke with the city's police chief about the thousands of troops that President Trump sent to his city.
The police chief saying that the National Guard staged behind me at no point since they arrived here on the ground provided assistance to the city with these protests. There is a curfew in effect. It remains in effect this morning, and it has been effective. Much calmer overnight than previous nights. The LAPD confirming dozens of people were arrested.
Small groups of protesters gathered in downtown Los Angeles were quickly broken up at the start of curfew Tuesday night with a show of force by LA police officers. Earlier, nearly 100 people were arrested, detained, and loaded onto LAPD buses for failing to disperse. The protests a reaction to President Trump's immigration crackdown.
Los Angeles was under siege until we got there. The police were unable to handle it. You can speak to the chief. He said it on television 3 nights ago. He said, this is more than we can handle.
We asked the city's police chief about coordination with the National Guard.
We don't need the National Guard, and they're not here to help us right now. They're here to facilitate what the federal agencies are doing on the immigration front.
See, I'm confused because President Trump said that they were brought in to assist with the protests.
Yeah, well, that's not our understanding.
The only National Guard troops that we have seen have been protecting federal buildings like this one. We have not seen any out on the streets, and their very presence alone has been attracting protesters like this crowd.
I see this as an unlawful invasion of California sovereignty.
National Guard soldiers have been acting as security for federal agents who posted these arrest pictures on X. Meanwhile, some of the 700 deployed Marines are being stationed and training in Orange County, more than 20 miles away.
We honor their service. We honor their bravery. But we do not want our streets militarized by our own armed forces.
The Marines are here. They are used to war zones. Are you concerned about them interfacing with protesters?
Anytime anybody comes in the city and we're not clear on what roles and responsibilities are, there's a concern. I worry for our own people.
And on the subject of the Marines, it's unclear what kind of additional training they're receiving. Meanwhile, we can tell you that the National Guard has been assisting with ICE raids in what appears to be the first of its kind widespread use of the military in such operations.
Look, I'm sure by now you have seen a lot of images of what is happening on the streets of Los Angeles. They are everywhere. They're on television, they're on social media. And to be clear, there have been moments where the protests have been very chaotic. And there are moments where they have certainly also been violent. I mean, I'm sure you have seen this image of an autonomous Waymo car lit on fire by protesters many times. I feel like it is all over my social media feed more than almost anything else. And Fox News has been using the image basically like wallpaper. You can see a lot of the examples there to depict the city of LA in a state of complete chaos. What you may not be seeing are scenes like this. This was the scene outside of the clothing manufacturer that federal immigration agents raided. These are family members of the people who were arrested, gathering to tell their stories and demanding due process for their loved ones.
I had to witness him being chained up like he was some kind of dangerous animal.
I witnessed how they put my father in handcuffs, chained him from the waist and from his ankles.
The hardest and most painful thing is that my children miss their father. He is our family's sole financial support.
I was present during the raid. I saw with my own eyes the pains of the families, crying, screaming, not knowing what to do, just like me. That's why the families demand free of all workers, legal representation, and due process.
And NBC News reports tonight that tactical units from ICE, like the ones we have seen this week in LA, have been told to be ready to deploy to 5 other cities run by Democratic leaders. 2 sources familiar with the matter tell NBC News that special response teams, as they're called, teams that use heavy Bearcat-tracked vehicles, long guns, tactical vests, have been ordered to deploy in the following cities: Seattle, Chicago, Philadelphia, the D.C. area, and New York City. And what we are thinking of right now as an LA issue, and what we're talking about as an LA issue or a California issue, is very much quickly becoming a national issue. And remember the order Trump used to send the National Guard into Los Angeles? Doesn't mention California even once. It's a nationwide order. So Trump pretending these largely peaceful protests warrant troops in the streets of LA matters. I mean, because these protests in no way warrant sending in the National Guard. That's not just a moral statement, or it's not just my personal opinion, which it also is my personal opinion. But legally, importantly, to federalize the National Guard, for the president, any president, to order the National Guard into a state without that state's governor's approval, there needs to be either an invasion, a rebellion, or a belief that the president is unable to execute the laws of the United States.
Invasion by a foreign nation, a rebellion or dangerous rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, or the president is unable with regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Which authority is triggered here to justify the use?
I don't know. You just read it yourself, and people can listen themselves, but it sounds like all 3 to me.
Sounds like all 3 to me. I mean, that was the Secretary of Defense overseeing our nation's military today, saying that Los Angeles is currently the site of an invasion, a rebellion, and is a place where the president of the United States is unable to execute the laws of the country. That is their justification to claim they need the National Guard on LA's streets.
All over the country this week, regular people are mobilizing against Donald Trump and his administration's overreach, both against his reckless, destructive efforts to detain law-abiding, peaceful neighbors in communities across the country, and also his decision, under dubious legal authority, to mobilize the National Guard and the Marines against peaceful demonstrators. Today, we are seeing folks taking the streets demonstrating against what is happening in this country, from Los Angeles to New York, El Paso to Raleigh. And this weekend, there will be many, many more protests, coast to coast, in cities big and small towns, to counter-program Trump's North Korean-style military parade he's throwing himself on his 79th birthday. Those protesters have a simple message: we have no king in America. The constitutional right to protest, enshrined in the First Amendment, exists for a reason. And I got to say, watching all this develop over the last few days, it feels odd to have to say this, but protests are good, actually. Protests against cruelty and tyranny and for our shared values are a good thing, and never more so than in the face of an authoritarian threat to our most cherished liberties. People should be peacefully protesting against the ongoing attempt to end American democracy we've been witnessing. An attempt that began on Trump's first day in office of this term, when, as one of his very first official acts as president, he pardoned every single participant in the violent insurrection he incited at the Capitol on January 6th. Even the people who bashed the heads of cops in. The people convicted of seditious conspiracy against our country in jury trials. Of course, the Attorney General and Trump's spokesperson, as she is, says this is all different somehow.
You've been criticized for having a double standard with the president pardoning all these people who attacked police officers on January 6th in his first day in office. How do you answer that criticism?
Well, this is very different. These are people out there hurting people in California right now. This is ongoing, no longer. We're going to protect them. We're going to do everything we can to prosecute violent criminals in California. California is burning. These people are waving Mexican flags, yet they don't want anyone to go back to Mexico. They're burning American flags. This is the United States of America, and we're going to protect Americans. We're going to protect all citizens out there.
First of all, I'm just duty-bound to say, when January 6th was ongoing, when people were getting hurt and Donald Trump had a chance to stop it, he didn't, remember? Crucially. right? So when it was happening, when he was watching the coverage of the cops getting their heads bashed in, he didn't stop it. Also, she's, I think, misrepresenting the protests in California. The Constitution protects waving a Mexican flag at a protest. If foreign flags require the National Guard, I got bad news for some members of Congress. Perhaps most importantly, the January 6th rioters hurt people. They assaulted cops with bear spray and tasers and flagpoles. Those pardons on that first day made it crystal clear, if it wasn't already, it was to me, but for anyone else who was following. Donald Trump does not care a whit about law and order, about the law, about any order other than one with him on top.
The president, as I just answered, supports the right of Americans to peacefully protest. He supports the First Amendment, but that is not the majority of the behavior that we have seen taking place in Los Angeles.
I'm sorry, that's just completely divorced from reality. It's more like the opposite of true. The overwhelming majority of protesters in Los Angeles have been peaceful. You, of course, would not know that from watching Fox News, which has been breathlessly covering the protests like a scene out of RoboCop, as if Los Angeles was at risk of burning to the ground any second, banners proclaiming rioters wreak havoc in LA. Violent anti-ICE protests spread nationwide. They're still at it, even now, days after the demonstrations died down, like looping the same things burning that were burning 4 days ago. And again, Donald Trump, who watches Fox all day, is pickling his brain in the brine of these lies. The White House even put out its own propaganda video, selectively editing a handful of moments from about 2 city blocks to make it look like the entire city of Los Angeles is burning to the ground. It's not. And yes, people have thrown bricks. They've lit cars on fire. You can see that. They shouldn't do that. They also don't speak for the vast majority of demonstrators who have been entirely peaceful and playing music and dancing and shouting slogans and engaging in prayer. And those people should keep demonstrating peacefully. This is why the right to, quote, peaceably assemble exists and is enshrined in the very First Amendment of the United States Constitution. We, the people, don't wield the power of the state. What the people have is the ability and the right to go out in the streets and to yell and to petition their government and, yes, peaceably assemble. You are allowed to publicly disagree with the government in this country. In fact, the American tradition of protest predates America itself. It's part of what gave rise to America. We all learned about the Boston Tea Party in school, which, by the way, was a lot more property damage than what we see in Los Angeles. Today, basically everybody understands that the protests for racial justice in the mid-20th century, what we call the civil rights movement, were one of the most effective mass mobilizations both in our country's history and in the world. Those protesters knew that while legal challenges to segregation were part of the solution, lawsuits and the like, tangible, nonviolent direct action was equally necessary for victory. Aspects of that same approach were replicated in mass opposition to the Vietnam War later in the 1960s, which was part of what ultimately forced President LBJ out of the 1968 presidential race. During each of these periods in history, there are almost without exception protesters among these groups that did stuff that I don't like, that a lot of people at the time didn't like, that went too far. And a lot of times with these kinds of movements, it's only with hindsight we're able to see just how effective those protests really were. Public opposition to Trump is working. Protest is how regular people, ordinary folks, make change in this country. Outside of elections and volunteering and working in politics, right? For most ordinary people in between election cycles, the people, the millions of them who are opposed to the assault of our most basic rights, it is the most powerful tool we have.
If this turns into another summer of unrest, what are you prepared to do, sir?
About what?
If this turns, well, the protests have spread now to 16 cities across the U.S. If this turns in...
That's what you're saying. Do I believe you? I don't think so.
Well, I got that from the Fox News green room.
What we have is a situation in Los Angeles that was caused by gross incompetence. They didn't have the police to handle it. The police were asking us to come in.
Yeah, none of that's true. The police were not asking them to come in. They had the police to handle it.
Families in limbo why immigrants showing up to court in San Antonio are being detained and why it's now affecting U.S. citizen spouses and their children. In courtrooms across the country, something troubling to some is happening. Immigrants who were told to show up for hearings, some married to U.S. citizens, some with children, are now being detained and sent to immigration holding facilities. That includes the minors. The images that have gripped the country from San Antonio as families are torn apart. What's behind the increase in detentions? On Thursday, the most in a single day, more than 2,200 detained. But first, the protest across the country, starting in LA and now in San Antonio, Texas, where Governor Abbott has deployed 2,000 National Guards members and over 170 DPS troopers to protect the city from peaceful demonstrations expected to start Tuesday night. And again, what started all of this was Thursday. The most in a single day, 2,200 migrants arrested by ICE and ERO, which is Enforcement Removal Operations. They're all under the umbrella of Homeland Security. And what rights do these families actually have?
I'm joined now by the co-founders of Indivisible, Ezra Levin and Leah Greenberg. So Indivisible is overseeing the No King's Day protests, which are happening on June 14th across the entire country. What should people know in advance of these protests happening?
Well, we're coming out collectively as a broad popular opposition. And the first thing I would say is Indivisible is helping to run and coordinate these, but this is a big tent coalition. We are working with folks across the civil rights community, with veterans organizations, with faith leaders, with unions like our friends at American Federation of Teachers. Like, we're working across a whole broad breadth of spaces and people to bring out everybody who understands that what is happening in this country is unacceptable, that Americans did not sign up to have a king, that we did not sign up for people being ripped off of our streets and taken away from their families, that we didn't sign up for the incredible authoritarian encroachment on our rights and our liberties that is currently happening. And also that it's going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of people in about 1,800 events all over the country. You are probably quite close to your local No Kings event. And it is going to be a day in which we lean out of Donald Trump's power and we lean into celebrating in community with each other.
How does the violence in Los Angeles, the city that I'm in right now, how does that change things in terms of how you view a protest happening just days after Donald Trump decided to federalize the National Guard in the one of the biggest cities in the country?
Yeah, look, so what we saw in LA was surprise ICE raids rounding up workers around the city, coming in over the opposition of the mayor and the governor. Then, in response to peaceful protests to ICE, we saw an escalation that was not asked for by the residents, was not asked for by the mayor, was not asked for by the governor, to intentionally inflame the situation on the ground. This is what authoritarians do. It's right out of the authoritarian playbook. They go in, they try to generate chaos, then they use that chaos as an excuse to centralize power further and escalate power further. So what do you do when the authoritarians are escalating? What do you do? What is the solution? Well, we listen to the experts in authoritarianism. That's what we do. We ask historically and internationally, how do you effectively beat back? And the answer is, when they are cracking down on peaceful protests at a small scale, you've got to organize peaceful protests at a large scale. That is what works. That is what works. So for people who are watching this horrified at looking at what's happening in LA right now, what I would say is, you are not alone, and the solution isn't going to come from anywhere else other than you. We need people showing up in this moment peacefully, boisterously, with empowering protests saying, look, Donald Trump can try to come at us, our communities, our families, but the power isn't with him. The power is with us. And by demonstrating powerfully and peacefully this Saturday, what we're saying in one clear voice is, we don't do kings here. We don't do authoritarianism here. And ultimately, democracy is going to prevail.
For folks who are looking to participate, to be a part of it in their own city, where can they find more information?
You go to nokings.org, and I do just want to underline, if you have some sense that somebody else is taking care of this, the political leaders will cover it, or there are some professionalized organizers out there, or you're buying the BS line from Trump and MAGA that there are paid protesters out there, It's not true. It's you. It's everybody who is looking at what's happening in this country, looking at this overreach from this authoritarian government, saying, gosh, I don't consider myself an activist. I don't consider myself a leader, but I guess I'll show up. I guess I'll host my No King's Day, or I'll register and I'll show up and be part of this. That's what's building this. So if you want to be part of this, congratulations. You're welcome, and we need your help spreading the word.
Why is it important for folks on the periphery of politics to attend the protest here?
Well, here's what we know. We know a lot of people understand that something is wrong, that this is not how things are supposed to be, whether that is because they are dealing with the cuts and pains that DOGE has created for regular Americans all over the country, whether that is because somebody in their community has been taken by ICE, whether that is because they're simply they're seeing the attacks that are coming on Medicaid and they're worried about what that's going to mean for their family. We want to pull all those folks in, right? We want to make sure that people understand we don't have to agree on everything. We don't have to collectively come up with our 10-point solutions for everything that we're going to do. To organize to push back right now and to check this administration's attacks on our rights and on our services. It's completely bananas that we are in a situation where they are telling us that they are going to cut Medicaid for the poorest folks in this country. They're going to cut Medicaid for kids and elderly people. And simultaneously, Donald Trump is going to spend $100 million on a parade to make himself feel better.
Right.
I think we can reach a lot of people who see themselves in that message, who think, wow, something is wrong and it's time for me to show up here.
What does success look like on Sunday morning? Look back, the protests have concluded, and what would constitute a success?
I mean, a few things. We have a few key performance indicators, KPIs, as we call them. So I want people in an unexpected number of people in an unexpected number of places showing up in force. I want, as we saw on Hands Off on April 5th when we had 1,300 protests globally, I want them to be peaceful. I want them to be boisterous. I want to see people's dogs and people's families and people's kids out there in mass protesting, demonstrating. I want to see new people getting engaged, not just the same activist class, as you said. And I want them understanding that this one protest, as powerful as it feels, as impressive as the narrative is, as awesome as the pictures are, I want them to understand that this was an inflection point, but not an end point. And so I want to see them funneled into active participation on the ground, plugging into communities wherever they are, red states, blue states, purple states, rural areas, suburban areas, urban areas. I want them finding their community and them finding their community at these protests and building from that.
And one more.
I take it a slightly different way and just say, we're in a moment where the point of the authoritarian playbook is to chill dissent. It's to make people scared. It's to make everyone afraid of using whatever power they have to speak out, to stand up, to fight back. And what I want is for a lot of people, millions of people, to understand that they are not alone. And for the millions and millions more who are looking at these protests and thinking, maybe I should be pushing back, maybe I should be doing something more, to also understand that they're not alone. Because that is how we are going to collectively marshal the people power necessary to take on this administration.
Brian, courage is contagious. We're looking to spread a lot of courage.
Perfectly put. One more time, where can folks who are looking to participate find more information?
NoKings.org.
NoKings.org.
A wave of protests are gaining momentum ahead of what could be one of the biggest days of national defiance this year. As Los Angeles and other cities remain on edge following intense demonstrations earlier this week, attention now turns to the upcoming No Kings protests set to unfold in nearly 2,000 locations across the country on Saturday. These rallies are timed to directly counter a military parade in Washington, D.C., celebrating the Army's 250th anniversary, a spectacle that also falls on President Donald Trump's 79th birthday and Flag Day. The protest, coordinated by the 50501 movement, aimed to reject what organizers describe as rising authoritarianism and billionaire-centric policies under the Trump administration. And the name 50501 represents 50 states, 50 protests, one movement, a unified stand across the nation. Now, according to the No Kings website, the demonstration's theme is rooted in the belief that President Trump's leadership resembles that of a monarch rather than a democratically elected president.
They've defied our courts, deported Americans, disappeared people off the streets, attacked our civil rights, and slashed our services. They've done this all while continuing to serve and enrich their billionaire allies.
Now, while Washington, D.C. will in fact host the parade, no protests are scheduled in the nation's capital. Instead, organizers are intentionally shifting focus away from D.C. The flagship rally will actually be held in Philadelphia to offer what organizers call a people-powered alternative to the taxpayer-funded military celebration in Washington.
It are Democrats saying they want to reclaim the American flag. It's also being titled No King's Day. Does the president see himself as a king?
This is a constitutional republic, and we want to see all of our citizens be proud of the country in which they are given the privilege and the blessing to live. And I think that those images of foreign flags being waved with, by illegal criminals and by violent rioters in the face of cars blowing up and of flames in the city.
Now, organizers insist that all No Kings events are firmly committed to nonviolence. In fact, participants are instructed to attend the protest with someone known, remove facial recognition from their phones, and refrain from bringing any weapons of any kind. They're also being equipped with digital toolkits and invited to attend training calls, including a mandatory host meeting and martial training to ensure the events stay organized and peaceful. While immigration is not the core focus of Saturday's protest, advocacy groups have cautioned undocumented individuals about participating due to safety risk. Still, the energy building around the No King's Day of Defiance is undeniable, and organizers claim this will be the largest single-day mobilization since President Trump returned to office.
We do not want to give Trump an excuse to crack down on peaceful protests, which is exactly what he wants to do. We don't want to give him some sort of narrative excuse to say protesters are protesting the military. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, power depends on the people. It flows from the people. It depends on the consent of the governed, and on Saturday we're going to show up to make that point very clear.
And as tanks roll into D.C. and flags wave high, all eyes would be on the streets, not just for celebrations, but for the resistance rising just out of view.
President Trump's ordered the deployment of 700 Marines who will be arriving in Los Angeles today to join thousands of members of the National Guard who've also been deployed to the city. Speaking at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, President Trump criticized the California governor and Los Angeles mayor who opposed the deployments. Some of the troops in the audience booed at the mention of their names.
In Los Angeles, the governor of California, the mayor of Los Angeles, they're incompetent, and they paid troublemakers, agitators, and insurrectionists. They're engaged in this willful attempt to nullify federal law and aid the occupation of the city by criminal invaders. That's what it is. They're invaders, no different.
Protests against militarized immigration enforcement have spread to other cities like New York, Chicago, and Atlanta. This weekend, on Saturday, under the banner of No King's Day, at least 18,000 rallies have been organized nationwide, more and more joining every day. This coincides with a major military parade that will be taking place in the Capitol. Tanks and other armored vehicles are being transported to Washington, D.C. for the parade on June 14th, which is Donald Trump's 79th birthday and the U.S. Army's 25th anniversary. On Tuesday, President Trump threatened heavy force would be used against anyone who protests at the parade.
And we're going to be celebrating big on Saturday. We're going to have a lot of, and if there's any protester who wants to come out, they will be met with very big force. By the way, for those people that want to protest, they're going to be met with very big force. And I haven't even heard about a protest, but, you know, this is people that hate our country, but they will be met with very heavy force.
Protest organizers are encouraging participants to go to Philadelphia instead of Washington, D.C.
No King's Day. I mean, before I said 18,000, but I think the number is 1,800 cities and towns and villages and counting. But how you're organizing and also your decision not to hold a major protest in Washington, D.C. on Saturday as Trump threatens to use heavy military force against protesters, but how the organizing is taking place.
Yeah, that's right. Well, look, Indivisible is a movement of regular people. We are working with partners and an extraordinary coalition across the entire pro-democracy coalition, from veterans groups like our friends at Common Defense, labor unions, civil rights organizations, immigrant rights groups, faith leaders. We really want to pull in as many people as possible into this collective moment of peaceful defiance of a would-be dictator. Now, these events are organized by people in your community, right? They are overwhelmingly volunteers who are putting them together in order to create a community space for us to push back. There are, as you said, there are actually 1,900 on the map as of this morning, and it continues to rise. We anticipate hitting over 2,000 events around the country by the end of today. If you are pretty much wherever you are probably about less than 30 minutes away from your closest No Kings event. They have incredible coverage, including in really red areas where you might not expect there to be resistance. That what we're finding is that this is everywhere. So if you are interested, you can go to nokings.org and you can look on our map and find the event that is closest to you. If there is not an event that is close to you, there is still time to organize one yourself, pull together a few folks in your community and collectively say, we're here to declare no kings, stop the raids, stand together as communities, and reclaim our democracy.
For more on the latest news, the troop deployments and the planned rallies this weekend.
I wanted to bring Jojo Sweat into this conversation, former Marine with the group Common Defense right now. First, I wanted to get your response to Marines being deployed to the streets of Los Angeles. At this point, 700 of them, though President Trump has now said that National Guard and Marines will be deployed around the country. And also get your response as a former Marine to what we're calling this parade, but in fact, it's more than 24 M1 Abrams tanks, each weighing more than 60 tons. This is why it's costing something like tens of millions of dollars, this parade in Washington, to shore up the streets. The question is if they will be damaged by this heavy military hardware. They're going to be going down Constitution Avenue near the White House in a procession that until recently was not part of the 250th anniversary of the Army's programming, accompanied by scores of infantry, fighting vehicles, heavy artillery weaponry, plus some 6,600 soldiers as helicopters fly overhead.
Does it make me feel good that it's the president of the United States that is requesting this type of armed reaction on its citizens, that is citizens that are actually practicing their rights that they have here in the United States? As far as the parade, it's an egregious overspend. It is a showing of his ego. It is also his birthday. It is not just the Army's 250th year of service. It's actually the Marine Corps' birthday later on this year. So we don't have these individual parades or support of parades by the military to the president like you've seen in North Korea. We just went through 2 crazy quarters of this new administration with them giving us Doge, and on the pretense that we need to save money as a country and that we're broke. And so to say those things and enact a Doge and talk about cutting 83,000 jobs at the VA and Medicare and care for everyday Americans, but then to host this parade in Washington, D.C., where there's not even really roads to support this. We're spending an egregious amount of money. And for what? A birthday celebration that is completely unnecessary.
If you could talk more about the amount of money, for example, the 45 million. It started at 20 million, but now it's gone up, as you point out, then yet thousands of jobs have been lost through DOGE. If you could talk about the health care and cuts to veterans' health care.
Yeah, these cuts to veterans' health care are already showing up, actually, especially in rural communities or with veterans that are using specialty services specifically for cancer treatment. We're talking to those veterans already who are being affected, who are being denied care, who have lost their psychiatrists, their therapists on staff. And so then turning around and spending that money in the face of America for a parade for a president does not seem like you really care. And we were in DC just the first week of May, trying to interface and speak with Secretary Doug Collins. And in fact, he actually ran from us when we asked him the question about cutting 83,000 jobs and then having a parade for the president. But a lot of these representatives don't want to answer those questions, or they want to relate it to recruiting. And I don't think that this is what recruiting dollars should be spent on.
So if you could explain more fully, Jojo, about the number of people who go into the military hoping it will help them become U.S. citizens, and yet seeing that people are being deported after they have served in the U.S. military.
Yeah, it's thousands. I was actually a recruiter during the time that we were recruiting for the Forever Wars when I came back from that war. And so I was a recruiter in Denver, Colorado from late 2003 to 2006. We were giving away at that time, which was totally unprecedented for the Marine Corps, a 2-year contract to join the United States military because we were in an active war. And what that means is that instead of serving 4 years and then 4 years in the IRR, you would do 2 years on active duty and have 6 years on the IRR. And many talking points when we were selling that program to join the United States military was talking about a pathway to citizenship. As a recruiter and somebody who used to have to compile all the documents of anybody that I needed to enter into the Marine Corps and send to the MEPS, it floored me to discover that after the MEPS and medical process and verifying who you are as a person of entry into the service, generally the buck stops there. And it becomes then the onus of the service member to find the way for that pathway to citizenship. And if they do, and they have a good command that helps set them up to do the paperwork, they may get several appointments that are scheduled in future time. And then when that service member deploys or gets reassigned, that is the farthest thing from their mind, because in their mind, they're thinking, well, I joined the service with a pathway to citizenship. They have all my documents. They know everything about me. They must be taking care of it. When in fact, the United States military has no impact or no design on helping you actually get that citizenship. So unfortunately, a lot of people leave the service thinking, I'm a U.S. citizen because I served in the United States military, and I have this beautiful document called a DD-214. And when in fact, that is not the case. And when they find themselves in a situation that makes them eligible for deportation, that is generally when they find out that they are eligible for deportation and are not a U.S. citizen.
What we have seen transpire in Los Angeles, California in recent days is shameful. Left-wing radicals waving foreign flags viciously attacked ICE and Border Patrol agents as well as Los Angeles police officers. These criminals injured police, threw rocks at police cars and officers, burned vehicles, shut down freeways, and lobbed Molotov cocktails, all because the Trump administration was removing violent criminal illegal aliens from the city. These attacks were aimed not just at law enforcement, but at American culture and society itself. Rioters burned American flags, chanted "Death to ICE," and spray-painted anti-American slogans on buildings. But President Trump will never allow mob rule to prevail in America. The most basic duty of government is to preserve law and order, and this administration embraces that sacred responsibility. Democrats like Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass shamefully failed to meet their sworn obligations to their citizens. They didn't have the courage to do the right thing and protect law-abiding Californians from rioters. That's why President Trump deployed the National Guard and mobilized Marines to end the chaos and restore law and order. The mob violence is being stomped out. The criminals responsible will be swiftly brought to justice, and the Trump administration's operations to arrest illegal aliens are continuing unabated. Mayor Bass then embarked on one of the most outrageous campaign of lies this country has ever seen from an elected official, blaming President Trump and brave law enforcement officers for the violence. She accused heroic American immigration and customs enforcement officers targeting illegal alien murderers, rapists, and pedophiles of, quote, sowing terror in communities and disrupting basic principles of safety in our city. Around the same time, Governor Newsom claimed that immigration enforcement actions were causing chaos. That's how radical Democrats have become. Their opposition to President Trump has forced them to side with illegal alien criminals in their communities and violent rioters and looters over law enforcement officers who are just doing their jobs. Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom fanned the flames and demonized our brave ICE officers. Instead of defending their city and their state, Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom claimed that in order for the riots and the violence to stop, ICE needed to leave and immigration raids must end. In other words, the position of the Democrat Party is that the federal government is not allowed to enforce our laws and to arrest and deport illegal alien criminals. They're attempting to use a violent mob as a weapon against their own constituents to prevent the enforcement of immigration law. This is deeply un-American and morally reprehensible. All because the Trump administration was removing violent criminal illegal aliens from the city. Blaming President Trump and brave law enforcement officers for the violence. She accused heroic American immigration and customs enforcement officers targeting illegal alien murderers, rapists, and pedophiles of, quote, sowing terror in communities and disrupting basic principles of safety in our city. Heroic American immigration and customs enforcement officers targeting illegal alien murderers, rapists, and pedophiles.
As protests spread across our country, we begin today with a sober warning from the governor of the state of California. That is, of course, the state at the epicenter of both Donald Trump's immigration crackdown and his efforts to use the United States military inside the United States and to potentially use it against Americans.
Trump and his loyalists, they thrive on division because it allows them to take more power and exert even more control. And by the way, Trump, he's not opposed to lawlessness and violence as long as it serves him. What more evidence do we need than January 6th? Look, this isn't just about protests here in Los Angeles. When Donald Trump sought blanket authority to commandeer the National Guard, he made that order apply to every state in this nation. This is about all of us. This is about you. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes.
As Governor Newsom spoke, protests spread across our country from New York City to Denver to Milwaukee. At least 25 rallies took place in major cities. More protests are taking place today ahead of large crowds expected to come out on Saturday when Donald Trump is holding a military parade in Washington, D.C. In Los Angeles, 700 Marines have been mobilized and are in the area now. Meanwhile, armed National Guardsmen have been aiding ICE agents in immigration raids across the Los Angeles area and beyond, including in California's agricultural and farming communities. The Los Angeles Times reports this. Alarm spread through California agricultural centers Tuesday as panicked workers reported that federal immigration authorities, who had largely refrained from major enforcement action in farming communities in the first months of the Trump administration. NBC's Jacob Soboroff is out in Ventura County, California, site of one of the raids that took place on Tuesday. Jacob, take me inside. Everything happening on the ground there.
Nicole, this is the latest location that the Trump administration has deployed ICE agents in a form and in a fashion that heretofore we haven't seen, as you mentioned, during this administration, and certainly not on a wide scale during Republican nor Democratic administrations for many decades. This is Ventura County. In Ventura County, one of the hearts of California's agricultural economy, which, by the way, is part of the economic engine of the United States of America. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry in the fourth largest economy in the world, the state of California is. Ventura has thousands of farms just like this one and tens of thousands of workers who work on these farms. And yesterday, as videos started coming in of ICE chasing after workers in fields like this, just like in Los Angeles to the west, it has struck fear into the hearts of the workers of this community. And the idea that this would be some kind of national security threat, or this would be some kind of clear and present danger to the people of California, take a look for yourself. You know what's happening out here right now, Nicole? There are strawberries sitting behind me that are going unpicked. Of what happened in Alabama back in 2012 when a restrictive immigration law was put into place back then, and it decimated the agricultural economy. Things are dying literally on the vine. Maybe JB can give you a look. Take a look. I can smell the strawberries from where I'm standing right now. There are a couple of workers out in this field, but really all you see is fruit that is going unpicked. And so what ultimately will end up happening, Nicole, is in a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months, if not weeks, you're going to start to feel the impact on the economy, not just of California, but across the country. The food supply of this state and of people across the nation will start to be impacted. And most importantly, Nicole, the workers who are at the heart, the beating heart of California's economy are not going to be showing up to work. And obviously the consequences of that are very clear to everybody. I can tell you that people in this community are incensed. The mayor of Oxnard, California, a city here in Ventura County, spoke out along with the police chief of Oxnard. They represent those business owners that you're talking about. And I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially the mayor of Oxnard said, not only does this put our citizens in danger, in jeopardy, scares people from cooperating with law enforcement, but obviously this is detrimental, if not devastating, to the economy of this part of California. The idea that this is happening here, of all places, you know, does this look like a dangerous location to you? Does it look like there are violent criminals walking out in the fields behind me? This is a change, and this is a change that's going to affect dramatically not only the food product, as I said, and this is the message that they're sending, that goes out across the country. You think by the end of the summer, by the way, when this impact is being felt, as we get into the fall, Thanksgiving season, the produce that comes from here, the vegetables that come from here, the nuts that come from California, and we're talking about billions of dollars of products, produce, and also tens of thousands of people, and virtually overnight, things are going to change out here. And like I said, it is something that the agricultural community here has been fearing for a very long time, and I think a lot of people thought this was not going to happen, but here we are.
I mean, to your point, this is where there is scant public support. Pew Research, which last asked the question of the public in March, only 15% of Americans support deporting undocumented immigrants who have a job. 14% of Americans support deporting people who are parents of children that were born here. 9% support deporting people who came to our country as immigrants. And only 5% of all Americans support deporting someone married to a U.S. citizen. I imagine that the people who work there are behind you. Well, they're definitely all in the first category. They have a job. So 85% of all Americans oppose deporting people like the workers, if they happen to be illegal, who work in the fields behind you. Are you seeing evidence of that public opposition to deporting these folks?
Oh, of course. There were rallies on the streets here in Ventura County yesterday immediately after this happened, and several different coalitions swung into immediate action. I can't quite communicate strongly enough how unusual it is to see what I saw on the drive up here. I saw the same CBP Black Hawk chopper, Aaron Marine, that has been flying around downtown Los Angeles, and we confirmed this looking at flight tracking software, flying around these fields. A Black Hawk chopper that normally is down on the border, watching for people that are crossing in an unauthorized fashion, looking for cartel activity on both sides of the border, is flying over strawberry fields in Ventura County. I think I'm just going to leave it at that. I mean, you make your own judgment about what that means and whether or not it's necessary, but that's what's happening at this hour in Ventura County, California. Ventura County has thousands of farms, more than 2,000, maybe as many as 3,000 farms that look just like this. There are tens of thousands of farm workers that work at these farms every single day, and many, if not most of them, are undocumented immigrants. This is around the time that you would see a lot of workers out here. And today, it has been a virtual ghost town of workers.
That's our Jacob Soberoff reporting from farm fields in California's Ventura County last night, noting that many fields were empty amid fears of ICE raids targeting farm workers who tend them. New video showing several of those pursuits, agents chasing, even tackling one worker through the rows of crops as federal vehicles circled this field. In the sky above, NBC News spotting Customs and Border Protection helicopters flying over these farms. Many of these undocumented workers are working there. And now United Farm Workers, the labor union founded by Cesar Chavez in the 1960s to advocate for farm workers, is sounding the alarm. Joining us now from one of those fields in Ventura County is Roman Pinal. He is the National Vice President of United Farm Workers. Roman, it's great to have you with us to shine some light on this part of the story. Let's start with those videos we've now all seen online that we just showed our audience. What do you know about the ICE raids targeting field workers this week?
Well, what I know is that these raids need to stop. They need to stop. These kinds of tactics, there's no way to treat valuable members of our community. No one should have to work in fear. And ironically, I'm here with a full crew of workers who are harvesting radishes. These radishes are going to end up at our grocery store shelves this weekend for all the Father's Day barbecues that are going to be happening around this country. And that contribution, that just having a beautiful celebration this weekend is not possible without the men and women, farm workers, who are doing this amazing work for us here in Ventura County today. So these videos are horrifying, and despite the fear, farm workers are doing their part to make sure that this country is fed and that we can proceed with our celebrations like this weekend.
It is such hard work that those workers are doing for all of us. How are your members feeling right now? Are they showing up for work, or are they too scared?
Yeah, just look over my shoulder, right? Like, they know that their job is important. They contribute to this country. They're valuable members of our society. And in the Southwest in particular, all over the country, when tacos are prepared, radishes are going to be at the grocery store. That's the proof that our men and women in the fields are doing their part. They're showing up for work and contributing to the important agricultural economy. And they're doing it, unfortunately, right now in an environment of being targeted and being afraid. And that's not right. Farm workers deserve better. President Trump said he would go after criminals. I don't see any criminals here. I see men and women who are making an immense contribution to our country. They're feeding America. And yet here they are working through fear all across California. And we got to do better for this industry and for the men and women who make this industry, the agriculture industry, possible.
Roman, let me read you something that the president put on social media today. He said that farmers have been saying this, quote, "Our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace." And then he went on to say that in many cases, criminals apply to these jobs. What's your reaction?
Yeah, he can go to Congress and look at a bipartisan piece of legislation called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act that would remedy those concerns and would allow farm workers to participate in this job market in a safe and secure way. It would be good for our communities. It'd be good for the agriculture sector. That's why the Western Growers Association has joined us in sponsoring this legislation, and it would be incredibly good for the men and women who are doing this work.
And I do want to just note that more than a third of America's vegetables and 3/4 of fruits and nuts are grown there in California. You point out who's doing the work of getting that food to store shelves. Roman Penal of the United Farm Workers, thank you for being with us. We appreciate you and what's being done there behind you.
Thank you.
Blaming President Trump and brave law enforcement officers for the violence. She accused heroic American immigration and customs enforcement officers targeting illegal alien murderers, rapists, and pedophiles of, quote, sowing terror in communities and disrupting basic principles of safety in our city. This is deeply un-American and morally reprehensible.
A recent raid on an Omaha meat production plant is almost certainly not going to draw the level of media attention as, for example, what's happening in LA. But there's a case to be made, and I'm going to try to make that case, that it says everything about the Trump administration's approach to migrants and the topic of immigration. So the president of the food packing company, Chad Hartman, he's been very vocal about what recently happened there. He said that the front office was stunned by the aggressive nature of the raid and confused about why the company was targeted in the first place. He said, my biggest issue is why us? We do everything by the book. But understand, they rolled up at this meatpacking plant with a list of 97 people that they wanted to screen or haul away. And they did, in fact, end up hauling dozens of people away. And so why were they surprised by this? Well, the plant uses E-Verify. That's the federal database used to check the immigration status of employees. When the CEO said as much to ICE officers who carried out the raid, they told him the E-Verify system is broken. And so the CEO's like, I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? This is your system run by the government, and you're raiding me because your system is broken? And I don't know which is worse. I don't know if they actually think it's so broken that even though this company is following all of the regulations and they're doing everything by the book and they still get ICE raided, or if ICE is just lying. And I know which I think is more likely. I think they're just lying. I don't think they give a damn about whether these people have their documentation in order. I think they've been told what needs to happen, and we'll get to that more in just a little second. But you might wonder, why the raid in the first place? Like, why show up with this long list? Is it because a bunch of murderers were working at this meatpacking plant? It's a great cover for getting rid of bodies, I suppose. Nope, not at all. It's just that there's a lot of immigrant workers that work there. And that's true in Omaha, and in particular this area where I believe like 1 out of 4 of the local residents are originally from outside the United States. It's just that meatpacking plants rely heavily on immigrant workers who are willing to do the physically demanding work that a lot of native-born Americans won't, at least for the money. The industry, they say in the Associated Press, has not yet been the focus of President Donald Trump's immigration enforcement efforts, but the administration has been intensifying its efforts in recent weeks. And so you might wonder, wait, why? I mean, you can understand, can't you, why they wouldn't be targeting these plants is because they need these workers to be able to function. I mean, you haul dozens of people away. Can the plant even function? It's certainly going to be slower. How does that even work? So why change it? Desperation, not need, desperation. Because recently, this is the end of May, Stephen Miller, so he's the head of the immigration policy, he called ICE's top 50 field heads into DC. And according to a source, Stephen Miller wants everybody arrested. Why aren't you at Home Depot? Why aren't you at 7-Eleven? They said. And by the way, what do you know? A couple weeks later, they are at Home Depot. And we get the situation in LA that we have, seemingly directly coming from Stephen Miller's impotent rage at the fact that he went outside in May and there were still brown people out there and he's not going to stand for it. And so there was pushback at that meeting from an ICE official, and to that, Miller said, what do you mean you're going after criminals? Miller got into a little bit of a pissing contest, they said. And the ICE official told Miller, that's what Tom Homan says every time he's on TV. We're going after criminals. So to be very clear, Stephen Miller is told we're going after criminals, and there aren't criminals at Home Depot. There aren't criminals at 7-Eleven. And Stephen Miller said, I don't want to hear about criminals. I don't care. Deport people. And so previously, places like meatpacking plants hadn't been targeted, but now they will. Not because there's criminals there. Stephen Miller doesn't give a damn It's only because they want to get the numbers up. That's all it's about. It was never about the worst of the worst. It was never about violent criminals or traffickers. It was never about criminals at all. It's about deporting every single brown person out of America. That's the point. And so we get to the meatpacking plant and 70 people taken away in buses with the windows blacked out. God only knows what happened to them. God only knows how many of them are even inside of the United States, whether they're in ICE detention, whether they've been sent to El Salvador, sent to Sudan, sent to God only knows, Malaysia, I don't know. Who knows? Stephen Miller doesn't know. Stephen Miller doesn't care. Just get rid of them. Those 70 people who were working at a meatpacking plant. You think Stephen Miller would ever deign to work a shift at a goddamn meatpacking plant, doing that hard back-breaking labor for long hours, for low pay? You think he would do that? You think any of these bastards would? No, but these people were. And so when I say constantly that America always has and always will be made stronger by the presence of awesome migrants like this is what I'm talking about. Okay, it's the people who make our system work. But to people like Stephen Miller, I don't like it. Don't like their skin color, get them the hell out of here. And so that's what they did. And by the way, the company president apparently reached out to Representative Don Bacon. Don Bacon looked into it. And apparently, yeah, they had complied 100% with the E-Verify. So he's now asking more questions or whatever. He says they're a victim in this. Yeah, but it's your party that's doing it, Don Bacon. Like, for this guy's like, yeah, no, they're just breaking the law by violating the E-Verify and raiding these places. But like, would you like to do something about that? Could you guys maybe stop this before it gets even worse? Evidently not. And so I want to just close with a quote from Douglas County Commissioner Robert Garcia. Learned about the raid. He represents the local area, rushed out of this meeting. Says, it clearly instills a lot of fear. People are asking me if this is going to continue for multiple days here in Omaha. People are asking me if this is going to spread to other cities. And here is the thing. It will, because it has to. Okay, it has to, not because America has been invaded, not because we're in danger from these migrants. It needs to happen because they have set arbitrary goals of how many people they want to deport. And they sold their voters a bill of goods that we can do that because there's 15 million murderers and thieves in America. Oops, there aren't. There's just good, hardworking wannabe citizens, someday perhaps citizens, which again, they want to avoid. And so they have to start taking people who've never broken any law, never violated any regulation or whatever, because they have to pretend that they're solving a problem that they invented in the first place. And again, it's not gonna get the coverage that the protests do in like LA or whatever, but this is happening all over the country and you're gonna see a lot more of it.
Our great farmers and people in the hotel and leisure business have been stating that our very aggressive policy on immigration is taking very good, long-time workers away from them, with those jobs being almost impossible to replace. In many cases, the criminals allowed into our country by the very stupid Biden open border policy are applying for those jobs. This is not good. We must protect our farmers, but get the criminals out of the USA. Changes are coming. Next up on News at 10, man discovers that poking himself in the eye hurts. Yeah, dude, of course chasing out the people who build our homes and pick our food is going to be bad for companies who rely on good workers to do exactly that. Trump is just now figuring that out. Perhaps if he wasn't so far up his own ass, he would have listened to literally everyone who had been saying the same thing for years since he's been making these threats. Economists have been warning for decades that mass deportations would devastate agriculture and hospitality and construction and food service. The Congressional Budget Office has repeatedly documented how immigrant workers, including undocumented ones, are essential to entire sectors of the American economy. But hey, very glad that the President of the United States is using the US economy as his trial and error experiment. In fact, this is a recurring theme. Remember when Trump announced his tariff wars would boost manufacturing? We all said that it would cause contraction, he did it anyway, and now manufacturing has been shrinking for months. Remember when he promised 90 deals in 90 days? We all said that his tariffs were a dumb economic policy, he did it anyway, and now we've got no deals other than one preliminary agreement with the UK, a country that, by the way, we have a trade surplus with. And now he's acting shocked that deporting the people who pick our food and build our houses might just cause problems. This is like being surprised that removing all of the mechanics from a garage might make it harder to fix cars. And so now, here's what's happening. Trump is preparing his exit strategy from his own immigration policy, and he's following the exact same playbook that he's used on every other issue. Step 1, make an extreme promise to fire up the base. Step 2, implement the policy with great fanfare. Step 3, reality hits and the policy fails spectacularly. Step 4, blame somebody else and quietly walk it back. And then step 5, pretend the new position was always the plan. We saw this with his tariffs. He announced them with big fanfare, the markets crashed, and then he started offering 90-day pauses and exceptions. We saw it with his 90 deals in 90 days promise, made the claim, failed to deliver, and then started talking about how trade deals take time. And now we're seeing it with immigration. The mass deportations are causing exactly the economic disruption that everybody predicted, so Trump is already laying the groundwork to blame criminals versus good long-time workers, as if there's some meaningful distinction that he just discovered. The guy's administration was quite literally chasing down immigrants in the fields as they were picking crops, and yet now he's pretending that the, quote, good long-time workers are accidentally getting caught up in the system.
In a written statement to Eyewitness News, a spokesperson for the United Farm Workers Foundation says they're taking innocent people who are trying to build their own American dream. This is not law enforcement. It's a campaign of fear against people whose only crime is living and working in the U.S. This is an injustice, and we are calling on our elected officials to speak out and protect their community members. Again, no word on how many people were detained here at this field.
Yes, who could have possibly guessed that specifically targeting agriculture workers in the fields would have an impact on agriculture? Thank God we've got Donald Trump here in his airtight logic to lead us to greatness. Notice too how Trump is trying to thread this needle. He's not backing down from immigration enforcement. No, he's still trying to get the criminals out of the USA, but now he's discovering that there are very good long-time workers who are different from the criminals we allowed into our country by the very stupid Biden open border policy. Classic Trump. Word salad designed to give him maximum flexibility. He can claim he's still being tough on immigration while quietly scaling back enforcement against the workers that businesses actually need. He gets to blame Biden for the criminals while still taking credit for protecting the good workers. But here's the problem with this distinction. It is complete nonsense. The same enforcement apparatus that goes after the criminals is the one that picks up the very good long-time workers. ICE does not make these fine distinctions when they're conducting these raids. The local police officers cooperating with federal immigration authorities don't know who's been working at the same farm for 10 years versus who just arrived. Trump is trying to create a distinction that doesn't exist in practice because he needs a way to back down without admitting he was wrong.
Well, we're not targeting. In fact, if you look today, I put out a statement today about farmers. Our farmers are being hurt badly by, they have very good workers. They've worked for them for 20 years. They're not citizens, but they've turned out to be, great. And we're going to have to do something about that. We can't take farmers and take all their people and send them back because they don't have maybe what they're supposed to have, maybe not. And you know what's going to happen and what is happening? They get rid of some of the people because, you go into a farm and you look and people they've been there for 20, 25 years and they've worked great and the owner of the farm loves them and everything else, and then you're supposed to throw them out, and you know what happens? They end up hiring the people, the criminals that have come in, the murderers from prisons and everything else. So we're going to have an order on that pretty soon, I think. We can't do that to our farmers, and leisure too, hotels. We're going to have to use a lot of common sense on that.
Governor Newsom also took Trump to task, calling him out for suddenly suggesting that he's going to protect farm workers from deportations. Take a listen to Newsom.
This is what he does. He creates a problem, and then he tries to be a hero in his own Marvel movie. Did it on fill in a blank on almost every topic, creates the problem, and then tries to do a make-believe as if you're all perfect little sheep, and you're going to go on with it to be the hero in his own Marvel movie. He initiated those raids. He significantly increased the scale and scope of those raids. That's why he wants the National Guard.
You had a Biden administration for the last 4 years that didn't enforce our immigration laws, which is why we need to pass this one big, beautiful bill so we can secure our border and focus on getting these illegals out of the country. Regardless of what they may be doing right now, they entered the country illegally, and therefore they are illegal and they are criminals and they need to be deported. And I don't know why a governor would want to try to protect illegal activity inside a state. And the president has made it very clear. If the governor or the mayor of the city isn't willing to protect the citizens of his state or the city, then the president will. The American people elected him to restore the law and order back to our streets.